Hi, Molly. So, if we remember, the question that we've been kind of looking at for all of our stories is how the environment affects the people who live there. And so this week, we're going to be taking a look at a story called Living in the Desert. Before we look at the story, we're going to look at how people survive in really hard environments. If we think about South Bend isn't a really hard environment. It's not really, really hot or really, really cold or really, really wet or really, really dry. So it doesn't have any of those extremes, right? But let's read about a few different places that have extremes or things that happen there and learn about how the people there have made different choices and have learned how to live in that environment. If you could turn to, I think it's page 130 in your book. Yes, 130, 131. And this is called an infographic because it has pictures and information about each picture that relates to it. So for example, if we take a look at this circle, we know right here is a photograph of what they're going to explain to us in this text right here. And then we have a photograph, and then the text is right below it. So the text is really close to the picture, or it's pointing to the picture. That might help us. But an infographic uses pictures and words, just like our diagram did last week. This is called an infographic. All right, so the first one I want you to look at is the circle. And this is actually a picture of the Nile River. And you've heard of the Nile River because we've heard about the Nile River in the Bible. But the Nile River is in Egypt. And if we read right here, it says it says flooding. When the Nile River flooded in ancient Egypt, water carried rich soil to people's land, and crops grew better. So the people built paths from the river to the fields so water could flow to the crops during the dry season. So this river right here would flood, and so the people built paths that water would be helpful to their fields and their crops. So it was a creative way of using the water from the river to help them with their crops. Now you know what this one is, right? An igloo. The Inuit people, the Inuit people in the Canadian Arctic learned how to build houses from ice and snow. These igloos trap heat inside and keep people warm. So in the extreme ice and snow and cold temperatures in the Arctic, they learned how to build a different type of home which would keep them warm and safe from the bitter cold. Now up on the top you see camels. What do you think of when you think of camels? What environment do camels live in? They live in deserts, right? Let's read this section on transportation. It says, because of sun and wind, people can die crossing the Sahara Desert on foot. Camels can go for days without water, so people use them to travel across the desert. So people quickly learned that they couldn't walk across the desert, but if they used a camel, they could get across the desert. And then look at this cool picture. It's like little tiers are cut into this mountainside. And this was a way that people used for farming. People living in the mountains build terraces, which are flat places that are cut into the mountains. Each terrace is a flat field for planting crops to grow food. So if you can imagine, this was the mountainside, and then they cut these layers in, but they can grow crops on these layers because now they have flat land. It's called terracing. So these are different ways that people made adjustments because of the way of the environment that they lived in. They made adjustments in their housing, in their farming, and their transportation. This one is a little bit different because they used the flooding to help them rather than, to help them with their farming. So that's a little bit more like farming too. Okay, on the opposite side, it does ask a question, and it says, Which solution for surviving in the environment described here do you think is the most creative? Why? Use text evidence to support your response. Okay, so in the Google Doc attached, you're going to write which one, so you choose one, which one do you think is the most creative? Which one do you think, oh wow, that was a good idea? So you don't pick one, that's going to be tricky. Pick one and then tell why you think it's the best one. Now remember, something you've been really working on is restating the question. So go back to the question and it says, which solution for surviving in an environment do you think is the most creative? So think about how you would start your answer. Okay, you might start your answer with, the solution for surviving in an environment that I think is the most creative is, right? So make sure you restate, tell which one, and then give evidence as to why you think that's the most creative. Alrighty, have fun.